Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Welcome to Layout Building. In this episode, I wanted to talk about some different philosophical and mindset approaches to the hobby. I've talked about some of this before, but I thought of kind of a new angle on it that we'll get to later. Anyway, you may have heard some terms like, prototype modeling, proto-freelancing, freelancing, etc. And so before we get too far into it, I want to kind of recap what some of those things mean. Prototype modeling is basically trying to be as close to the real thing as you can in miniature. People who are prototype modelers tend to be very strict about the time period they're modeling, what kind of equipment should be present on the stretch of railroad that they're modeling at a specific time, and that kind of thing. I think the most famous example I can think of right now is Jack Burgess's Yosemite Valley Railroad. I've had the privilege to visit that layout a couple of times, and it's August 1939 on that layout, and nothing that comes after that gets on the layout, and nothing that was off the rails before that gets on the layout. It's all very, very accurate within the limitations of his space and such. So then on the other end of the spectrum, you have freelancing, which is basically making up your own railroad and or location. I don't look at these things as kind of an either or thing. I look at it as more of a scale. Like you have the hardcore prototype modelers who may be kind of over here, and then you have maybe hardcore freelancers who are kind of over here. But there's a whole range of blending the two. You can have that's where the proto-freelancing term comes in. Proto-freelancing is basically mixing and matching those two things. It's kind of like if you had a real location but used a fictitious railroad on it, or maybe you had a fictitious location but used a real railroad's equipment on it, or something like that. Some people model fictional branch lines of a real railroad, and there's advantages and disadvantages to all the different approaches. And then beyond that, you've also got like a lot of the people who are into like Lionel and tinplate. They have a more toy-like approach, and I know some people who do Lionel also have a very realistic approach. So there's like I said, there's a whole range. But some people really like the toy-like aspect. They like the animation and stuff that does a lot of motion and blinking lights and all that kind of stuff. And for them, the toy-like aspect is what appeals. And there's all kinds of different ways to experience the hobby. And they're all good, really. It's whatever you like as far as that goes. But I wanted to talk a little bit about it in that you don't necessarily have to be just one of those things. Because I got to thinking about this because maybe because I'm a little bit crazy, I have actually 4 different layouts going at the same time. There's the Donner layout, which is going to eventually be in this room, which right now is still in the planning stages. And because of things that have been happening, I haven't even really been able to work on the room too much in the last couple of months, but I'm getting back to it slowly. Anyway, then I have the N-scale Siren Creek layout, which is basically freelanced. And then there's the O-scale game room layout, which is really just a display loop. And then there's the outdoor garden railroad. And, I've had some comments on the channel and different things, and I realize that my approach varies depending on what I'm doing. I'm not just one thing all the time. I would say the Donner layout is probably high on the prototype modeling spectrum, but not complete, because I am planning to take a couple of liberties here and there, either to make the layout adapt to the space, or to make it more interesting, or to better utilize certain parts of it. And in fact, I'm contemplating redoing the plan on part of the lower deck that I wasn't really happy with, in order to make it a little more interesting. I had planned to do a diesel servicing facility that was freelance, kind of adjacent to the staging yard, but it's basically just going to be a parking lot for diesels. There's not really going to be anything happening there operationally. So it's really just a place for diesels to sit there on a track and do nothing. And I thought, maybe having more staging tracks somewhere would serve the same purpose without having to work so hard on building a facility that's not really going to be used for anything. So one of the things I wanted to do, I have this grain elevator, which I built long ago, and it was part of my last permanent layout. And one of the best things about that layout was switching the grain elevator yard. And I saved this. And I have some other agricultural themed kits and such too, because that layout was theoretically based in California's Central Valley, which if you're not familiar is very agricultural. So I really wanted to make use of some of that stuff, because otherwise I don't know what to do with it. You know, I guess I could sell it or something, but I like this kit and I'd like to keep it. So I thought maybe what I would do is use a little modeler's license and put a grain elevator yard in that section of the layout instead of the diesel servicing facility that's really not doing anything, because then it would add operational interest. It's actually somewhere you could switch cars and do stuff. So I think that would be kind of cool, and I think it would just be a better use of that space. So even though, to my knowledge, there was not any structure like that along the Donner Pass route between Roseville and Sparks, I'm going to use a little modeler's license and I think maybe do that. I'm still working on the plan, so I'm sure I'll do another video about that in more detail later, but it is something I'm considering. So I'm willing to be a little flexible on the prototype aspect, in order to make the layout fun and, maybe have some more things to do operationally once it gets more completed. So, I would put myself maybe in the 70 to 80% prototype modeler, and maybe like 20% freelance on that score. Also, I'm not as strict with era. My era is basically, 1990 to 96 roughly, but I'm willing to stretch that a little bit. I'm just not that interested in being any more specific with my railroad for various reasons, but it's just not something that appeals to me too much. I just want to create the look and feel of the 90s without having to be 100% museum accurate so to a particular day or something. Anyway though, but it's still largely prototype based. Now on the other hand, like the Siren Creek in N scale, I want it to look realistic. I want to model it in a very realistic way, so still having a visually plausible look, like people could look at it and think, yeah, that looks real, but it's a totally fictitious place, and it's a totally fictitious railroad. In fact, two fictitious railroads. There's the narrow gauge Siren Creek and the standard gauge North Coast, which are neither one is real. I know there was a real North Coast Railroad for a while, operating on the old Northwestern Pacific, but it's not that. I think my model North Coast, because it's something I started back in the 80s, early 80s, predates that real railroad. But in any case, so that's a case of doing something that's freelance but trying to make it look realistic. And so that's a very different approach than the Donner layout. That layout was designed with basically trying to maximize the small size of that layout to make it as interesting as I could and as good for photography and operation as I could within a very small space, even for N scale. The whole thing is only about 2.5 by like 5 feet, so it's really not that big. So I wanted to, make sure that I maximize the potential there. In fact, I'm not even sure it's 5 feet. It might be 4 feet. I'd have to measure it. Anyway, it doesn't really matter for the purposes of the discussion. So moving on, the O-gauge layout in the next room makes no attempt at all to be realistic. There's no scenery. The track is built on a shelf that's made to just look like it's part of the room. And there's actually a couple other shelves that we've built since then that kind of match the style but are actually holding Legos right now, because Nicole and I build some Legos sometimes and then display the finished pieces on the shelf. But that's a totally different thing. That layout has no switches. It's just a loop track, and it's basically there to have a train that can run around the room. And I only have really the one engine. The only other 3-rail O engine that I have is one that was my dad's that's currently in pieces that I'm working on restoring. And if I get that restored, then I will run that one up there too. But that's about it. It's a totally different layout idea. It doesn't attempt to, do anything that looks like anything that's in the real world. So it's its own thing. And then there's the garden layout. Now, most of my garden equipment is 1/20th scale, or 1:20.3, if you prefer. Narrow gauge, backwoods kind of stuff. FN3 is what they call it. So with that scale and gauge combination. And I have the more serious, I guess you could say, FN3 sized cars, and there's some Bachmann cars and also some from AccuCraft. And they look pretty good, but I'm not trying to be a prototype modeler outside in any way. I'm just trying to have fun out there. I'm trying to build a layout that hopefully will be fun to operate if we ever get to the point where we could have operation sessions out there. But it's also just kind of meant to look good and be good for display running like we do during the holidays. It was a big hit during Halloween to have the second track and 2 trains running. But I'm not really worried about prototype anything out there. I'm not really worried about accuracy or trying to reproduce any specific place. Garden railroads are inherently dealing with stuff that's out of scale because you have out of scale plants. And I know they have like some dwarf plants and things you can get that look more in line with the size of the trains, but it's still, I think you would drive yourself crazy trying to be super exacting outdoors. So that's just maybe some people do it and that's great, but it seems like most of the outdoor layouts I see are a little more casual, and that's kind of what I'm doing too. So anyway, the point I wanted to get to, that I already kind of hit on, I think, a little bit, is that you don't have to be all of one thing in the hobby. You don't have to just be one kind of modeler. You can be different kinds of modeler, or a different kind of modeler depending on what you're doing, And even if you don't have multiple layouts, you could have different approaches on the same layout potentially. Like one of the things I considered and I kind of let go of because of lack of space. It's like there's only so much space in here. It is a fairly large room, but still it's finite. And if I wanted to include all the things I wanted to include, I had to let something go. So what I let go of was like the idea of having a fantasy branch line or something like that, which would have been like operate like a real like short line or something that interchanged with the Donner line somewhere, and then but would go off into an area where the scenery could be more like something by John Allen or Malcolm Furlow, if you're familiar with those guys. Kind of more fantastical, not so worried about realism, but just worried about being really cool. And I thought that could kind of be neat. I don't think I'm really going to have the space for that, but it's a cool idea. So, you could potentially do something like that in different spots on the same layout if you had enough space, that you could do something completely different. So I just wanted to kind of make the point that I've realized about myself, and I think probably it could apply to other people too, that you don't have to be just one thing. You can tailor your approach to what you're doing and the specific project that you're working on. So, and there's no right or wrong. That's the one thing I love about model railroading, is there's no real right or wrong to any of it. It's just what you like. And, there's nobody, really can tell you you're doing it wrong if you're having fun, because that's really the number one goal. Otherwise, if a hobby's not fun, then why are you doing it, right? So, I think it's important, and however you approach it is great. And so my advice, if you want it, is just to be yourself and just enjoy it. So anyway, that's about it for now. I just wanted to put that out there. Kind of still working on getting back in the swing of things. We've had a little bit of a break due to the Halloween maze. Cleaning up and now is what we're doing. It took a long time to set up. It takes a long time to clean up. So anyway, got some reviews in the works. I've got some other things in the works that'll be coming soon. So Hope you will enjoy those too. And for now, I'll just say stay tuned and thanks for watching.